How's it going, folks? Today we've got Adam Wilson stopping by to talk about how AI is impacting design. And it's a really interesting space and something I think that we are still figuring out in real time. We're talking about everything from that to spatial computing and really what the future looks like. So check it out and we'll go ahead and jump right in with him. Oh, man.
Hey, it's going really well. Good to
Good.
see you. Good to be here.
Yeah, same with you. How's things going? I heard you're moving to a new office.
Yeah, it is. It is moving day to day, so it's a little wild. We're packing up, shipping out. Really exciting, but as you know, it's a lot of moving pieces.
A lot of moving pieces. Well, man, thank you so much for taking the time out to chat with us today. I'm really interested to get
Of course.
your professional opinion on what is all of this AI stuff going on, especially and more pointedly, right, into the kind of design creative space, because a lot of it, at least what we talk about here, is in the realm of like coding. Or it might just be like natural language, but there's this whole other area of how it can be used in the market when it becomes either more mature or what it's kind of doing in the design space. So happy to have you on to be able to discuss some of that. I think your input's going to be super, super valuable. But before that, would love to hear kind of a little bit more about you. We've been friends for a long time, but for the audience and everyone watching to hear your background and a little bit about what Polyform does.
Sure. Yeah. I'll start with me. I'm Adam Wilson. My background's in design, so I started my career in industrial design, designing physical products and furniture and things. And right when the iPhone came out, I was like, this is it. Digital products where it's at. I was lucky to talk myself into a local studio here in Vancouver, Canada, that had shipped 7 of the 500 apps that went live with the App Store. So we were like really early Apple partners for iOS product design. And as such, got a lot of great referrals from them, got to work on a lot of really cool, innovative, like Web 2 products, I guess, like Nike Fuel Band was the first mass market wearable, worked on the Amazon Fire set-top box, which is the first like Apple TV style streaming device, the Disney Magic Band service, the Bloomberg trading terminal, lots of really cool projects kind of right off the bat in my career. Came together with some guys up from the Valley in 2013 and started a research and development outsourcing studio here in Vancouver called Momentous, where our goal was to design innovative consumer products for early stage startups and big brands using some type of emerging tech. And what was emerging at that time was a lot of IoT. We were working with Google on the Daydream, Samsung on the Gear VR, which were both kind of like put a phone in a headset type 360 VR headsets. Lots of other cool stuff for big brands, mostly companies like Verizon and Shell and stuff, but started getting into working with startups. And then we sold that company to Cognizant in 2017. And then a couple of years later, when my non-compete ran out, came together with some of the creative directors from that company to start Polyform, where we do what we've always done, which is designing consumer products for big brands and early stage startups using emerging tech. But what is emerging now is, of course, Web3, AI. We do a lot of augmented reality and like spatial computing here. So that's kind of the gist of what we're up to here. But it's a real end to end interaction we have with the founders here. Usually we're working with like idea stage startups, everything from naming all the way up to design, development, product validation and launch, and then working with them to optimize their product over time with user testing and all this kind of stuff.
Actually, the whole spatial computing might be an episode in and of itself, because I recently did go try the Apple Vision headset and have a lot of questions, especially when it comes to just user interaction and like how all of that's going to change when it comes to spatial computing. But for today's topic, though, would love to, we're going to say it again because it's everywhere, but talk about AI, but really kind of not to go into like the weeds of like using AI on like, because I know that you're really, really big with a lot of the AI image gen tools. I've followed a bunch of your stuff on LinkedIn. All of like the amazing work that I think you might have be one of the biggest power users of it. Is it MidJourney?
Yeah, MidJourney.
That I've ever seen. So I know that you've got a ton of experience in it, but really want to talk about kind of at that higher level, right? Like, what is it? What do all these tools like truly mean for the space? What does it kind of mean for this idea of creativity? And how might they be like additive or actually hurting it? And the first question that I would love to kind of get your perspective on is that some people I've kind of heard this argument from two sides of the coin, right? That AI's ability to like generate designs and concepts actually enhance what people do from like a creative lens, but that also it can kind of turn into like a crutch potentially, right? And actually might stifle creativity. So where do you kind of live on those two sides of the coin?
Yeah, I think a big part of it is like, you know, where is the person at in their career who's deriving these opinions? When I was really young and a design student in school, um, Photoshop was like pretty new and I was using it for everything. And I felt like it was this power tool that allowed me to do things that, I wouldn't have even understood how to do prior. And I grinded on the tool. I was using it like 6 hours a day, making all types of shit with it. And I think that AI is a lot of the same. It's like you can grind on the tool, you can use it, it can open up new avenues for creativity. But like, just because I'm good at Photoshop didn't like mean that I was a good designer. And it's kind of the same with AI. It's like, just because you're great at generating images doesn't mean you know anything about design necessarily, right? um, Alongside using the tools, there was many years of color theory and typography and layout design and all these kind of fundamentals that like the tools are never going to teach you.
Mm-hmm.
And the tools right now can't discern between a good and bad version of. So it's um, I don't know that it's stifling creativity. I would say that it promotes creativity. That's why I'm such a heavy user. But you still need to have those underlying skills to actually use that creativity to generate anything valuable.
Mm. Yeah, and that's I feel like it's the similar, and this is like a very, I would say, potentially like weak line of comparison, right? But it's like, when calculators were introduced to schools, everyone's like, no one's ever, everyone's going to forget how to add. And, now like what's going to happen? Um,
Yeah.
and I guess I'm hearing that it's the same on the design side, but like, is that the case that just because you can go create some images doesn't make you a good designer? Is that like the world of today, right? Or do you see it getting to a point where the tools actually are able to discern between like a good and bad design, and like what the minimum skill set of what it means to be a designer will change, meaning that what you learn in color theory um may not be as like poignant in the future, because we do have these tools that like offset some of that gap that might be filled by something else.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, you know, just saying what is good design is so broad. Like we can dial into like, let's just say UX design or like digital product design. I'm designing an app or something. So like right now, these tools are really the tip of the iceberg, right? We've got MidJourney can create great images. We've got things like Galileo that can create really rudimentary app interface layouts. Um, they are not yet good enough for production. They will become good enough for production over time, but it is like any AI model, it's good data in, good outcome. If I say, 3 years from now, I'm using some AI tool to make a user flow for the onboarding of my like language app, let's say it's a Duolingo competitor, and I say, make a great onboarding sequence. Well, there's a lot of variables that go into why it's good. Who's the audience? How familiar are they with a kind of product like this? What device are they on even? And then like, sure, the AI could go out there and like look at thousands of different apps, but how's it going to know which one was more effective or not? It doesn't have access to the conversion metrics that define if it was a good onboarding workflow or not. And neither do designers. Like we don't know right away what's going to be a great solution to a problem or not. We can follow the industry best practices, as will the AIs be able to eventually, and then we can run tests and see where it's doing well or not, and make iterative changes from there. I would expect that eventually AI will be able to do that as well, where I can make a onboarding flow and then have AI generate 100 different variations of subtle differences that then we can run like A/B testing at scale on, and instantly derive some type of understanding. But this assumes you've got like one model integrated into like 4 or 5 different tools here. It's
Right.
like passing information from one to the other. And I feel like we're still a pretty far ways away from that.
Mm-hmm. That's like so the thought that like always creeps up in my mind, and I've heard people bring it mostly in the context of like text generation, right? Or like writing like blog articles or content that goes online.
Mhm.
That eventually it's going to create this almost like entropy, like equilibrium, right? Where just like all the text out there is just created by AIs, right? And now you just kind of have this bland existence of everything's the same tone, everything's fairly same level of ambiguity. Everything starts with therefore, comma, and like some next. And I think that's and while I think it's impactful on the text generation side, what I find interesting about the creative or the image and really like visual design side of it, is that it might be it's easier to detect there, right? Because I feel like a lot of visual design, especially when it comes from artists, is so fed from their like personal experiences, that make it discernible. Like, have you found, I guess, any instances today of visual designs that have been created by AI that you just like that you were blown away that it was created by a model and not just out of the gate? Or can you pretty much every time be like, no, that was, I can tell?
I mean, it's pretty noticeable for sure. Like, there's this kind of hyper reality to a lot of the imagery, especially I would say anything that's like photographic or 3D or something. Then of course there's always some type of artifact within the image that an artist would have never put there. They're just some random little blob or an extra finger or whatever.
Yeah.
Um, where I see something and it's really impactful and makes me kind of question, like, was this made by a model, was this made by a person, is when people are really dialed into a prompt that is made to generate something that looks hand drawn, sketches. I see this a lot with like industrial design sketching and stuff like this, where again you still get like the artifacts. It's like it's not quite how a pencil would go across the page or whatever. That'll go away. But yeah, I think overall I feel like the same with text. It's fairly obvious right now what's AI generated, not. I was actually in an elevator yesterday, and there was like a screen on it, and there was a bunch of images of just like the logo of the development company that built the building, and I was like, oh, that's some real MidJourney V3 type shit there. It's like they should really not be using that. It's like it's just obvious. And it's the same when you see the kind of like posts on LinkedIn or wherever you see them, where it's like you can just smell it, you know?
Mm-hmm.
and that'll go away over time for sure. And I think to your point earlier about this kind of homogenization that'll happen of like, it's all about averages, right? It's like write me a great LinkedIn post. Well, what is a great one? It's one that appeals to probably the widest audience, which means it's like right in the middle, which means that it's kind of just in the middle.
Right.
It's not going to offend anybody. It's also not going to be so boring that nobody wants to read it, but it is really just the middle. So I think the people that are really going to win, I think it's going to make a huge opportunity for people who don't exist in the middle, and when it comes to art and stuff like this, I could see 10 years from now, like hopefully when my son is old enough to be getting into music, there's a real resurgence of like rock and like people playing instruments, and like 5-piece bands are back on the radio and live music because AI can just generate a beat and a rapper, no problem. They can generate a song, no problem. But to see it live, people playing like analog instruments and stuff, I think there's going to be a real resurgence of kind of craftsmanship and that like analog creation as a result, because there's going to be so much of this. Anything in the middle is just going to be made by AI. So you got to kind of have a hook.
Right. Right. And it's almost like this future where um, human made gets stamped with the same premium that handmade and in physical goods does in the future, right? And my next question around this, because it comes into like the idea of like design trends, but and to take a step maybe to the front of the train where we've talked about kind of the outputs of the models, but what I'm really interested in your kind of like POV is that I don't know if anyone's really cracked the code of like what is a good UI UX interaction type of design for AI. I mean, the dominant one in this space right now is obviously the chatbot, right? That's what everyone's flocking to. MidJourney and stuff I would say is similar chatbot. You put in a text prompt, maybe you can drop it an image, but it's this very procedural in and out type of thing, and or just text based. Like, do you have or have you seen any like wild ideas on like what the future of human computer interaction and AI like will be?
Yeah, I've definitely got some ideas around that. We've been working on some stuff here at Polyform that is definitely forward leaning compared to just text input. But I think where text input is really great is question, answer. I need this thing and it's returned. Where it's not very good is trying to craft any type of complex, overarching narrative structure. And that doesn't necessarily mean that it's a story, but like trying to make a board game with Chat GPT, which is something I've been doing for months and months now. It's great at the little things, but you try and get it to remember the balance equation for your different cards and pieces and stuff, and it'll just constantly forget. And as a human would, right? Like it's kind of good at keeping the same amount of stuff in its brain as a human is, because it is a human to human kind of mirror interaction, chat. It's how two humans communicate. Two humans can only hold so much shit in their brain and in a conversation at a time. So you need another interface for what is greater than that. Something we've been exploring a lot is this kind of like, visual development and kind of like node-based interface. So similar to what you'd see in like Unity or like Spark AR or like lots of different tools to kind of generate bigger conversations and see how they all interrelate to one another. It also allows you to create like overarching narrative structures that have individual kind of nodes of information that feed into that and cross-pollinate as well. So kind of a visual representation of what could be multiple, say, Chat GPT threads, all interrelated.
Right.
instead of like these individual threads where you're trying to talk about a whole bunch of things on one topic within this one thread. Just have all of those as individual nodes that are kind of part of this bigger equation. I think that we're still figuring it out. I think
Mhm.
it's an exciting time to be a designer in the space, because I think back to like when I started designing for iOS and we were on like iPhone 2, and there were no best practices. There were no there was no human interface guide yet.
Right.
There was no real rule book to how to do it. Now it's, a well trodden path. It's like there's best practices for basically everything on mobile, but there are not for AI or for AR really, and like spatial computing. So for both of those areas, I feel like it's a really exciting time because we're now the generation of designers that get to define those things. There's actually like new challenges, designing another iOS app, not a huge challenge. The challenge there now is to make it a lifestyle brand.
Mm.
All startups, in my opinion, need to be lifestyle brands now. It's all about the marketing and positioning, because probably you're not bringing anything terribly innovative to the table. Um, but with the AI and AR, it's this awesome opportunity to define these new best practices and standards.
Do you think that, because I wonder if spatial computing, right, like actually is the vehicle that truly redefines like AI, right? And like computer interaction. Like do you think that we'll hit some upper ceiling, or like has the idea of like a 2D, meaning like I don't know, maybe, but like 2D of interfacing with like a keyboard and a mouse and a monitor, like have we like reached the top of like what we can do as far as design goes there, and now really to make that next leap we've got to start thinking about other things?
For sure. Yeah, I believe so. And I think even more than that, if you look at like, this is going to get like philosophical for a minute,
Oh,
but
let's go there.
try
Let's
follow
go.
me.
Yeah.
You look at like all of human history, right? And it's 2D images on 2D surfaces, from paintings on cave walls to the printing press. Now we have books, then we're TV, now computers, mobile, etc. It's always been 2D on 2D, um, some type of surface, some type of image, some type of text. We are now transcending that into 3 dimensions. And, Apple and Meta have taken a really great first step of just bringing the old 2D best practices that we know and love and can easily navigate into a 3D space. We just got floating 2D panels now in a 3D space, which is fine. But it is an interim solution to a bigger problem and challenge, which is, how do I walk through a blog article?
Mm.
How do I interact with a table's worth of data dimensionally? Why would I want to interact with it dimensionally? Why did I want to interact with it in 2 dimensions? Just because I had to, really, right? It like so much of what we do on the laptop is just a translation from what we did on paper,
Mm.
but there is no real translation from what we do in a 3D space to now a 3D digital space. Being an industrial designer, right away, I think about like, oh, how we work with clay, how we like build things out of wood, how we construct things in a physical world, and taking inspiration from that, or like how CNC machines work, which is like subtractive manufacturing, or how 3D printers work, additive manufacturing, right? And looking at places like that for inspiration, rather than looking at like, what's the best way to do this on iPhone? Now I'll do it in ABP.
Do you think that there's going to be a resurgence of need for industrial type, industrial designers, like people that understand the world in 3 dimensions versus those that were, and this is not to not to belittle either or role, but um if I had to guess that the industrial designer, the amount of, the number of industrial designers in the world is probably significantly less than graphic designers, right? Mostly because the need hasn't been there. But with spatial computing, right, and this idea of change, do you think that there will be like a large kind of resurgence of that role or that knowledge base?
The knowledge base for sure. I think actually that is going to be one of our biggest bottlenecks in the coming years to um, creating at scale 3D applications for these new 3D devices like the Vision Pro is that it is actually a very big leap for a 2D designer to move into a 3D environment and workflow. And indeed, the tools barely exist. There's some great 2D or 3D design tools that are out there. Most of them are not for this specific use case. It's kind of like, again, to age myself, when I started designing for iOS, Sketch wasn't out yet. Figma didn't exist. We were using Photoshop and like printing out manuals to hand, like 100-page manuals to hand to the dev team to know how much padding is like between this block and the other one.
Right.
And that's kind of where we are with spatial computing right now, is that the skill sets aren't there. There's no clear defined best practices. It's a really big leap to get people to go from being a 2D UX designer to a 3D AR UX designer. I think it's even questionable how interrelated those skill sets are. Right now they are, because we have a lot of 2D floating windows in 3D space. So there's an obvious correlation there. But in future, I'm not actually sure how related those two things are going to be: traditional UX design as we know it today, and what will be the future of interaction in a 3D space tomorrow.
Right. I mean, I've never actually thought about it till now, but it is vastly like maybe now is the skeuomorphisms coming back. You got to design
Oh yeah,
things that,
big time.
that seem real, right?
Well, you need to have points of reference, right?
Sure.
Whenever you're doing something new, you need to have one foot in the old so that you know what the fuck is going on, right? So pseudomorphism, skeuomorphism is great because I can say, oh, like I know how to operate this can in real life or in 3D, it's obvious right away. And this, you see this in VR all the time, of course, right? Like I'm on a spaceship and I have to like push down the big button to open the door or whatever, right?
Right.
It's makes a little bit more sense because you're kind of like living out this fantasy there, but in essence, you're just interacting with UI elements that are made to look like physical elements. So I can see, yeah, I can see that coming back in a big way, like as a trend that won't stick around very long. And, 3 or 4 years from now, we'll have totally new interaction design paradigms and models that become the new standard for these 3D spaces.
Yeah. And last question. I know that we are end of our 30-minute block, so I want to respect your time. You do have to jump. But the last one that I wanted to ask you about is this idea of how do you design for, because I've seen it like scattered throughout, but this idea of like dynamic generative design, meaning that objects or objects are either on a screen or in 3D space will actually kind of change and morph based on how you interact with them, but on a very individual basis, kind of backed by AI, right? So when you think about that, like, how does that affect kind of the future of the design field? Do you think that's something that's going to catch on? Can you like mass produce or mass design experiences like that? Is that even possible? Or is this just some kind of, fringe thing that people have come up with now?
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting area of thought there. The idea of people being able to customize their interface, especially on like really hardcore SaaS tools and big enterprise pieces of software and stuff like this, Salesforce, SAP or whatever. That's been around for a long time. I think if you get into the research, you'll see that not many people customize. Most people stick to baseline, and that there are a myriad of good reasons to do that. One, how do you get trained on a tool that is different from the person training you? And then that goes all the way up the chain into QA, and anytime you get stuck, troubleshooting, whatever. There's also, a familiarity part of it. Like how can I do a tutorial that shows me click this button, then click that button if the buttons are in different places for everybody?
Right.
It becomes really difficult to onboard people into new software and to eventually come to own it. I think way in the future, we'll get into a world of, I don't want to say interface less, but like, do I really need to have an app on my phone to call an Uber? Can I not just say, like, call me an Uber, I'm going to this place, and then
Yeah.
it can ask me if I want to review the driver or whatever. And in a way, that's customization.
Mm-hmm.
And in a way, it's just a voice interface to a standard interface. But yeah, I think, to this idea of like AI constantly changing the interface to adapt to the usage style of the user, I think it's a great idea conceptually. I think practically, it's like the old Henry Ford thing, right? Like people would just ask for faster horses.
Mm-hmm.
Like people don't know what is a good interface, and how they use one isn't necessarily optimal. Like how many people do you know that have like, well, I don't know how to do it the right way, but here's my like hacky workaround that
Mm-hmm.
like, here's how I do it. And it's
Right.
different from how Susan does it and different from Joe. So like, I think putting interface decision making of any kind in the hands of the user is like dangerous territory, because it's kind of saying like they know just as well as the designer does, which is obviously untrue. And the same could be said from the AI. It's like, what is a false positive interaction versus a positive interaction? Like, am I doing it this way constantly because I don't know how to do it the right way? Or am I doing it this way constantly because I prefer that way? It's hard to tell.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah, yeah. And I feel like I would make a lot of potentially a small group of people angry, but I feel like it's everyone that tries to argue about running Linux as like a daily OS. It's like, oh, because you can customize all this. I'm like, do you really need to though? Like, is that
Sure.
it?
Yeah.
Well, look,
Certain people do, right? But like, imagine the amount that you need to know to customize it, and it be better than the hundreds of people working on it came up with.
yeah, yeah, no, that is fair. But Adam, look, man, I again thank you so much for the time. This was super helpful, and look forward to chatting again. But if not, I'm going to put a bunch of your social links down in the bottom, so in case anyone give you a follow. If not, until next time. And thank you so much, man. We really do appreciate it.
Thanks so much. Yeah, it was a pleasure.
Awesome. Cheers, man. That was Adam Wilson from Polyform. If you want to check him out, you definitely can. I'm going to put all of his link down in the bottom if you want, as well as Polyform's website address. But thank you all for stopping by, and we will see you on the video.